A Bachelor's Complaint of the Behavior of Married People by Charles Lamb. As a single man, I have spent a good deal of my time in noting down the infirmities of married people, to console myself for those superior pleasures, which they tell me I have lost by remaining as I am. I cannot say that the quarrels of men and their wives ever made any great impression upon me, or had much tendency to strengthen me in those antisocial resolutions, which I took up long ago upon more substantial considerations. What oftenest offends me at the houses of married persons where I visit is an error of quite a different description. It is that they are too loving. Not too loving neither. That does not explain my meaning. Besides, why should that offend me? The very act of separating themselves from the rest of the world, to have the fuller enjoyment of each other's society, implies that they prefer one another to all the world. But what I complain of is that they carry this preference so undisguisedly, they perk it up in the faces of us single people so shamelessly, you cannot be in their company a moment without being made to feel, by some indirect hint or open avowal, that you are not the object of this preference. Now there are some things which give no offense, while implied or taken for granted merely. But expressed, there is much offense in them. If a man were to accost the first homely featured or plain dressed young woman of his acquaintance, and tell her bluntly that she was not handsome or rich enough for him, and he could not marry her, he would deserve to be kicked for his ill manners. Yet no less is implied in the fact that having access and opportunity of putting the question to her, he has never yet thought fit to do it. The young woman understands this as clearly as if it were put into words, but no reasonable young woman would think of making this the ground of a quarrel. Just as little right have a married couple to tell me by speeches, and looks that are scarce less plain than speeches, that I am not the happy man, the lady's choice. It is enough that I know I am not. I do not want this perpetual reminding. The display of superior knowledge or riches may be made sufficiently mortifying, but these admit of a palliative. The knowledge which is brought out to insult me may accidentally improve me, and in the rich man's houses and pictures, his parks and gardens, I have a temporary usufruct at least. But the display of married happiness has none of these palliatives. It is throughout pure, unrecompensed, unqualified insult. Marriage by its best title is a monopoly, and not of the least invidious sort. It is the cunning of most possessors of any exclusive privilege to keep their advantage as much out of sight as possible, that their less favored neighbors, seeing little of the benefit, may the less be disposed to question the right. But these married monopolists thrust the most obnoxious part of their patent into our faces. Nothing is to me more distasteful than that entire complacency and satisfaction which beam in the countenances of a new married couple, in that of the lady particularly. It tells you that her lot is disposed of in this world, that you can have no hopes of her. It is true, I have none, nor wishes either, perhaps. But this is one of those truths which ought, as I said before, to be taken for granted, not expressed. The excessive airs which those people give themselves, founded on the ignorance of us unmarried people, would be more offensive if they were less irrational. We will allow them to understand the mysteries belonging to their own craft better than we who have not had the happiness to be made free of the company. But their arrogance is not content within these limits. If a single person presume to offer his opinion in their presence, though upon the most indifferent subject, he is immediately silenced as an incompetent person. Nay, a young married lady of my acquaintance, who, the best of the jest was, had not changed her condition above a fortnight before, in a question on which I had the misfortune to differ from her, respecting the properest mode of breeding oysters for the London market, had the assurance to ask with a sneer, how such an old bachelor as I could pretend to know anything about such matters. But what I have spoken of hitherto is nothing to the airs which these creatures give themselves when they come, as they generally do, to have children. When I consider how little of a rarity children are, that every street and blind alley swarms with them, that the poorest people commonly have them in most abundance, that there are few marriages that are not blessed with at least one of these bargains, how often they turn out ill and defeat the fond hopes of their parents, taking to vicious courses, which end in poverty, disgrace, the gallows, and sea. I cannot for my life tell what cause for pride there can possibly be in having them. If they were young phoenixes, indeed, that were born but one in a year, there might be a pretext. But when they are so common, I do not advert to the insolent merit which they assume with their husbands on these occasions. Let them look to that. But why we, who are not their natural-born subjects, should be expected to bring our spices, myrrh, and incense, our tribute and homage of admiration, I do not see. Like as the arrows in the hand of the giant, even so are the young children, so says the excellent office in our prayer book appointed for the churching of women. Happy is the man that hath his quiver full of them, so say I, but then don't let him discharge his quiver upon us that are weaponless. Let them be arrows, but not to gall and stick us. I have generally observed that these arrows are double-headed. They have two forks to be sure to hit with one or the other. As for instance, when you come into a house which is full of children, if you happen to take no notice of them, you are thinking of something else, perhaps, and turn a deaf ear to their innocent caresses, you are set down as untractable, morose, a hater of children. On the other hand, if you find them more than usually engaging, if you are taken with their pretty manners and set about in earnest to romp and play with them, some pretext or other is sure to be found for sending them out of the room. They are too noisy or boisterous, or Mr. does not like children. With one or other of these forks, the arrow is sure to hit you. I could forgive their jealousy and dispense with toying with their brats if it gives them any pain. But I think it unreasonable to be called upon to love them, where I see no occasion, to love a whole family, perhaps 8, 9, or 10, indiscriminately, to love all the pretty dears because children are so engaging. I know there is a proverb, love me, love my dog. That is not always so very practicable, particularly if the dog be set upon you to tease you or snap at you in sport. But a dog, or a lesser thing, any inanimate substance, as a keepsake, a watch or a ring, a tree, or the place where we last parted when my friend went away upon a long absence, I can make shift to love because I love him and anything that reminds me of him, provided it be in its nature indifferent and apt to receive whatever hue fancy can give it. But children have a real character and an essential being of themselves. They are amiable or unamiable per se. I must love or hate them as I see cause for either in their qualities. A child's nature is too serious a thing to admit of its being regarded as a mere appendage to another being, and to be loved or hated accordingly. They stand with me upon their own stock, as much as men and women do. Oh, but you will say, sure it is an attractive age. There is something in the tender years of infancy that of itself charms us. That is the very reason why I am more nice about them. I know that a sweet child is the sweetest thing in nature, not even excepting the delicate creatures which bear them, but the prettier the kind of a thing is, the more desirable it is that it should be pretty of its kind. One daisy differs not much from another in glory, but a violet should look and smell the daintiest. I was always rather squeamish in my women and children. But this is not the worst. One must be admitted into their familiarity at least, before they can complain of inattention. It implies visits and some kind of intercourse. But if the husband be a man with whom you have lived on a friendly footing before marriage, if you did not come in on the wife's side, if you did not sneak into the house in her train, but were an old friend in fast habits of intimacy before their courtship was so much as thought on, look about you, your tenure is precarious. Before a 12-month shall roll over your head, you shall find your old friend gradually grow cool and altered towards you, and at last seek opportunities of breaking with you. I have scarce a married friend of my acquaintance, upon whose firm faith I can rely, whose friendship did not commence after the period of his marriage. With some limitations, they can endure that. But that the good man should have dared to enter into a solemn league of friendship in which they were not consulted, though it happened before they knew him, before they that are now man and wife ever met, this is intolerable to them. Every long friendship, every old authentic intimacy, must be brought into their office to be new stamped with their currency. As a sovereign prince calls in the good old money that was coined in some reign before he was born or thought of, to be new marked and minted with the stamp of his authority, before he will let it pass current in the world. You may guess what luck generally befalls such a rusty piece of metal as I am in these new mintings. Innumerable are the ways which they take to insult and worm you out of their husband's confidence, laughing at all you say with a kind of wonder, as if you were a queer kind of fellow that said good things, but an oddity is one of the ways. They have a particular kind of stare for the purpose, till at last the husband, who used to defer to your judgment, and would pass over some excrescences of understanding and manner for the sake of a general vein of observation, not quite vulgar, which he perceived in you, begins to suspect whether you are not altogether a humorist, a fellow well enough to have consorted with in his bachelor days, but not quite so proper to be introduced to ladies. This may be called the staring way, and is that which has oftenest been put in practice against me. Then there is the exaggerating way, or the way of irony. That is, where they find you an object of especial regard with their husband, who is not so easily to be shaken from the lasting attachment founded on esteem which he has conceived towards you, by never qualified exaggerations to cry up all that you say or do, till the good man, who understands well enough that it is all done in compliment to him, grows weary of the debt of gratitude which is due to so much candor, and by relaxing a little on his part, and taking down a peg or two in his enthusiasm, sinks at length to that kindly level of moderate esteem, that decent affection and complacent kindness towards you, where she herself can join in sympathy with him without much stretch and violence to her sincerity. Another way, for the ways they have to accomplish so desirable a purpose are infinite, is, with a kind of innocent simplicity, continually to mistake what it was which first made their husband fond of you. If an esteem for something excellent in your moral character was that which riveted the chain which she is to break, upon any imaginary discovery of a want of poignancy in your conversation, she will cry, "I thought, my dear, you described your friend, Mr. as a great wit." If, on the other hand, it was for some supposed charm in your conversation that he first grew to like you, and was content for this to overlook some trifling irregularities in your moral deportment, upon the first notice of any of these, she as readily exclaims, "This, my dear, is your good Mr." One good lady, whom I took the liberty of expostulating with for not showing me quite so much respect as I thought due to her husband's old friend, had the candor to confess to me that she had often heard Mr. speak of me before marriage, and that she had conceived a great desire to be acquainted with me, but that the sight of me had very much disappointed her expectations. For from her husband's representations of me, she had formed a notion that she was to see a fine, tall, officer-like looking man, I use her very words, the very reverse of which proved to be the truth. This was candid, and I had the civility not to ask her in return how she came to pitch upon a standard of personal accomplishments for her husband's friends which differed so much from his own. For my friend's dimensions as near as possible approximate to mine, he standing 5 feet 5 in his shoes, in which I have the advantage of him by about half an inch, and he no more than myself exhibiting any indications of a martial character in his air or countenance. These are some of the mortifications which I have encountered in the absurd attempt to visit at their houses. To enumerate them, all would be a vain endeavor. I shall therefore just glance at the very common impropriety of which married ladies are guilty, of treating us as if we were their husbands, and vice versa. I mean, when they use us with familiarity, and their husbands with ceremony. Testacia, for instance, kept me the other night 2 or 3 hours beyond my usual time of supping, while she was fretting because Mr. did not come home till the oysters were all spoiled, rather than she would be guilty of the impoliteness of touching one in his absence. This was reversing the point of good manners. For ceremony is an invention to take off the uneasy feeling which we derive from knowing ourselves to be less the object of love and esteem with a fellow creature than some other person is. It endeavors to make up, by superior attentions in little points, for that invidious preference which it is forced to deny in the greater. Had Testacia kept the oysters back for me, and withstood her husband's importunities to go to supper, she would have acted according to the strict rules of propriety. I know no ceremony that ladies are bound to observe to their husbands, beyond the point of a modest behavior and decorum. Therefore I must protest against the vicarious gluttony of Serasia, who at her own table sent away a dish of morlas, which I was applying to with great goodwill, to her husband at the other end of the table, and recommended a plate of less extraordinary gooseberries to my unwedded palate in their stead. Neither can I excuse the wanton affront of, but I am weary of stringing up all my married acquaintance by Roman denominations. Let them amend and change their manners, or I promise to record the full-length English of their names, to the terror of all such desperate offenders in future.